friends, it's Shari. Today I'm joining my friend Nicole to stitch us some cute Easter eggs for Easter. I am using a color palette that I picked out from Benzie Design. I just created this color palette myself. I also picked up all of the coordinating floss for each of the felt colors that I picked out. These are all 100% wool felt, and I love that they have the coordinating floss so you can just pick everything up in one place. I'm making 3 eggs today, and each one starts with a basic egg die. Then I'm using the banded egg details for this first one, and this little inspiration sheet is basically like a recipe card to show you how to make this particular design. Now this one only cuts out the holes and it cuts out the center. The outside edge of this die will not cut anything, but it is nice and wide so you can line it up perfectly with your basic egg. So when I run this through my die cut machine, I'll get that opening as well as the holes. Now I need to cut the banded piece, and I'm cutting this from white. This will cut a piece that layers over that opening and gives you the band that goes out to the edges. Next, I'll cut the egg that layers over that. This one has a really fun pinking detail around the edges, and this can be layered behind the opening that was cut in the orange egg or layer on top, which is what I'm going to be doing for this project. Next, I need to cut the holes for my little tulip detail. Now this one is a little different. The die plate is a little smaller. You line this up with the inside of the holes that are cut, but the reason why it's not the same size as the outside of the egg is because it can go in different places. It can go on the purple egg, the white banded detail, or you could even cut these holes out of this opening that was cut into that orange egg. I am going to be cutting it into the purple one because I'm layering that tulip on top like the example on the inspiration sheet. And you can see it cut just the holes for my tulip to go into. Now the tulip is 2 pieces, a back piece and the 2 petals in the front. I'm going to cut those from 2 different colors of felt and layer them together, which I think is fun because you get that nice detail of that darker petal in the background. And then there's also a die that cuts the little leaves. I'm going ahead and cutting all my pieces for my 3 eggs. The other egg I'm doing is a filigree egg. I've cut that basic egg. Now I'm pulling out the die that's going to cut the holes for my filigree design. Now this does have an up and a down. You can tell by the edges of the egg, and I'm just going to go ahead and mark mine with arrows so I always know which way is up. Now I'm cutting both the lacy detail here and the plain, but I am going to end up changing my mind when I get to stitching these together. So this dark teal that you see here, I'm actually going to change that out a little bit later. But you do want to cut the openings in this for a pretty color to peek through. So you're going to use these 2 dies to do that. This one will cut the little openings for the color to peek through and the holes to stitch a backer piece to. So you can see this cut the little openings and you can see the green is peeking through. But I also cut this peachy color with that other die that coordinates, and it can layer behind so that you can have a different color peeking through the holes than the little lacy details. For my 3rd egg, I am keeping this one a little bit more simple. I'm using the egg window details that will cut out this opening in my basic egg, as well as a piece to layer behind. And then for this one, I will be putting a monogram S on it for my little dog Scout. And I'm using the monogram alphabet as well as the inline monogram alphabet. These 2 alphabets coordinate with each other. The inline monogram alphabet will cut just the holes, and you could just stitch the S, or you can cut the holes and then cut a felt S with the monogram alphabet and then use those holes to line them up. So you can see I cut the inline monogram S from the pink color, and then I've cut the monogram S from purple. I actually ended up changing the colors of this egg as well when it came time to stitch it up, but I'm starting with the banded egg with that cute little tulip detail first. And of course, we want to start with what is in the front of our egg and then work our way back through the layers. So the first thing that is on the front of this egg is the tulip itself. So I'm going to start by stitching the tulip petals at the top. I've got the pink thread out that matches that lighter pink color. And I split it in half so I have 3 strands of floss. This is what I like to stitch with pretty much all of the time, except for when I'm stitching on some beads and sequins. So I started to stitch the little tulip together and realized I could do all this onto the purple. So I'm layering that darker color on first, lining up the holes, and then the lighter one. And then I will come in through the back, hold it with my finger, and then I am going to do a running stitch so it'll look like every other stitch. And I will go all the way around. I'm to the bottom of this one so I can add my other petal. And then I'll just continue on because this row of stitches is like one line. So just every other stitch basically with a running stitch till I get to the end right here, and then I will go back in the other direction, filling in these spaces that were missing on the front. It will also fill in the ones on the back, but for this one you're not going to see these back stitches for this particular portion of the egg. So I'm working my way back to the end, and this is going to be the method that you see me stitch pretty much all the time. There are going to be times on some of these eggs where I stitch all the way around once and do not go back because I like the look of that every other stitch. Now for my leaves, I'm doing the same thing, and I am using a contrasting color. Now I should have probably started at the base of each leaf instead of at the ends, because when I got to the bottom I had to go back up and I did have to tie it off every time. So I'm at the bottom going back towards the top, and then I will tie this one off. Now if I had started at the bottom and went to the top and back down, I could have easily just traveled over to the next leaf, but I really wasn't thinking about that. I probably will end up doing that next time. So I'm doing the same thing on this leaf, starting at the top. I will do my running stitch, which is every other one, towards the bottom, and then I will go back. So basically for this one, instead of using one piece of floss for the whole bottom of the flower, I am going to tie it off 3 times. So now that I'm back to the top of this leaf, I will just tie that off as well. And then I will just trim off these tails. Now I didn't feel like there was enough floss left on my needle to do the stem of the tulip, so I'm using the other half of the floss that I split in half, so this is 3 strands, and then I'm stitching the stem of the tulip in the same color. So I'm starting in that top hole, coming up through the back, and then I will do the exact same thing that I did on the leaves, doing a running stitch all the way to the bottom. Luckily, these leaves are kind of separated at the bottom so you can see the holes really easy, and you can also see your stem, which is kind of nice. I think if you wanted to do a more decorative stitch for the stem, like a chain stitch to make that stem stitching a bit chunkier, I think that would be nice too. I am sticking with running stitches for all of my projects today, but you could always use the opportunity of stitching to add in a bit more decorative stitch. So now my little tulip is all stitched onto that purple piece, and now I need to layer this onto my egg. At first I layered the purple piece on and I have some little dots of glue you can see there, and I realized I need to stitch all 3 of these at the same time. So I'm going to layer my purple piece onto the white piece, and those little dots of glue will just kind of help hold it in place a little bit, but you are going to see me use some wonder clips too. And then now I need to layer this whole thing onto the egg, and that's because the window that was cut out of the center of the egg has the same hole design that's on the purple piece and the white piece. So all 3 of those need to line up, and we also need to stitch that band on there. So once I have those lined up, and the really easy way to line these up is to look through the holes and see if you can see the light through the holes, and then you know you have them lined up. I'm holding each side in place with a wonder clip, and this will just hold things in place as I get my stitching started. Again, the stitching that I'm doing on this piece right here is going to all be hidden inside my egg. I'm actually using my Wonder Clip to hold the end of my thread, which is kind of nice in this situation. I don't always get to do that. And then I am going to stitch around this purple egg. This is going through the purple layer, the white layer, and the orange layer. And I worked my way all the way around, and then I'm going to go back in the other direction. I do like this look of the every other stitch, but this one, the holes were too even, and so you can see at the top I have 2 stitches right beside each other. So this is a good one to make sure you go back and do all the stitches. So once I get back around to the top, I'm just going to tie this off. And I stitched this in the orange floss that matches the orange of the body of the egg. I am going to go ahead and cut my batting for the inside, and this is my little trick to make stuffing much easier than trying to use polyfill. I use some quilt batting, and then I take the open egg die here, and I'm going to trace this with a Frixion pen. This would erase with heat. Not that it matters because this is going to be inside and you're never going to see it. But if I trace on the inside, then when I cut this out, I know that this piece of batting in the shape of an egg is smaller than my stitching. So it's going to be on the inside of my stitching, and I'm not going to be stitching through it. So you can see there where that fits. This one I felt like was a little thin, so I'm actually going to cut another piece of batting. So I'll have 2 layers of batting in this egg. It just depends on how thick your batting is and the look you're going for. So I'm going to pop those into the center. And I was ready to stitch my egg together until I remembered that I need to stitch these few little stitches that go horizontally across where the band is. So I'm just putting those in, and I am using the ecru floss that matches this color of felt. So I'm tying this off, and then to travel down to the other band, I'm going to tack it underneath one of the stitches on this internal circle of the egg. That will keep the thread that's traveled down to the bottom from being on the very edge of the egg, and just keep it out of the way. Now I could travel over to the other side as well, but I decided to go ahead and tie this off. So I'm looping it underneath one of those stitches and then back under and then through itself to tie it off in a little knot. Now I'm going to move to those other 2 horizontal pieces on the other side, and I will do the same thing. So I'm coming up through the back, holding it with my finger till I get those 2 little stitches stitched in. And that actually comes up behind the purple. I will tie it off. I will cut off the excess tail, but I'm not cutting off the piece where my needle is attached. And then I'll do the same thing here. I'm tacking it under that inner circle to keep it out of the way. And then I will stitch the 2 stitches of the band. Now I am not going to tie it off this time. I'm going to keep this on here because I have a nice long piece of thread, and it is in an outside hole, and I can just start in that spot to stitch around my egg. So I've got my little hanger that I will sandwich between my 2 pieces of batting, since I have 2 pieces this time. And then I am going to hold this in place with some clips until I get around to the top. Now when I do get around to the top, I am going to make sure I stitch through that ribbon so that it holds itself in place. Now because I came through the front piece and I wasn't going through the back, my thread is already started between my 2 main egg pieces, which is exactly where I want it to be, which is exactly why I didn't cut it off. So I can just go on through the back in the hole that lines up with where my thread was, and I'll start going back and forth with a running stitch all the way around. You can see I've already gone all the way around, and I'm about to where I started. I've already sewn in my ribbon, my clips are removed, and like I said, I made sure to pierce through that ribbon with my needle and thread when I was up there so it will hold that hanger in place. Now on this one, when I got back to my starting point, I decided that I liked the look of those every other stitch running stitch. So I decided I did not want to go back around in the other direction. So I'm going to come up between the two layers on that last stitch. And since I don't have a tail, because I did something different, I'm going to loop it through itself, under a stitch, and then through itself. And I'm doing that twice to create a little knot. Then I can take my needle between the two layers of the yellow, or excuse me, the orange egg, and I'll just push it out the back. I was having a little trouble because I'm going through a bunch of layers, and this is not a sharp needle, it's an embroidery needle. And then here is that finished tulip egg. I really love how this turned out. I love that little tulip, and I kind of want to stitch this on some other things. So now I'm moving on to that filigree egg, and I told you earlier that I ended up changing the colors, and that's because when I looked at these two together, that teal was so bright and overwhelming, I felt like it just took away and didn't make it look like a set, because I was trying to make all three eggs look like they belonged together. So what I decided to do is to eliminate that dark teal for that big piece and make the dark teal the little details that show through the green. So I eliminated that top layer completely, and I'm going to cut the little peekaboo windows out of the green. You can see I also cut that coordinating piece that layers behind out of the teal. So this is the look I'll go for, and then I also have that little circle that is also in that die set that I will hold on there with a sequin. So I've already gone through and popped out most of my holes. I have a few little stragglers there, and I will layer this behind this green piece, and I'm going to stitch that on first. So I've layered that, lined up the holes, and then I wanted to stitch this with a contrasting color. So I've pulled out the orange floss, and I will separate that so I have 3 pieces of floss. I know that I didn't use that teal as much as some of the pastel colors, but having this color palette to work from and the matching colors of floss gave me some little hints of teal in these projects. So I've got my holes lined up. I'll start on the back side, and then I will do my running stitch all the way around this shape. And you could also stitch this directly to the purple if purple was the color you wanted to peek out of those little holes. It all just depends on the design. So I've gotten back to where I started, and then I will go back in the other direction with my running stitch so that I have a solid line all the way around this little detail on the green. Once I get back to my starting point, I'll just tie that off and trim off these tails. Again, this is a piece that I'm layering onto that purple egg, so it doesn't matter what the back of this looks like. Before I layer this piece onto the egg, I do want to add this little pink die cut felt circle, and I am using a thinner needle with 1 strand of floss to do this because I'm also going to add a sequin and a bead. So I have a little white sequin here, and then I will pick up one of these pale pink beads, and then I will go back through the sequin, and that sequin will hold everything in place, and then I can just tie this off. And this is a really good opportunity for a little bit of embellishment and shine to these eggs. For the most part, I am just keeping it mostly felt, but the center of this egg just needed a little bit of bling. Now I can add this green panel to my purple egg, and it will line up perfectly because I used that die earlier that cut the little holes into the purple part. I am deciding to use that dark teal color of floss, so I have a bit of a contrast and I have that pop of teal again. I'm starting at the top, and I will do my running stitch down to where it intersects the outside edge of the egg, but I do not want to stitch the outside edge of the egg. Once I got down here, I just decided to take a look at it, and I decided I liked that running stitch. I didn't want to go back the other direction, so I'm going to keep going around, but instead of going directly to the next hole, which would be right here, which would make the traveling of my floss cross over all those holes. I want to kind of keep it out of the way like I did on the other egg. I'm just going to tack it underneath that stitch that I just made. And it's stuck on my egg here. So I'm tacking it under that stitch. Hopefully you can see that there. And then when I go over to this stitch on the outside edge, where my green panel starts again, you can flip it over, and that is going to hold that piece of floss away from the edge. So I will do that on every one of those edges as I work my way around, because I am going to end up in that last hole on every side. So I've gone around those edges and I'm back to where I started, and when I flip this over, you'll see exactly that I did that at every intersection. And then I'm going to tie it off in the same way. I'm going to tack it under and tie it off so it's not right on the edge. And then I can just trim off my tails. And I like that kind of every other stitch around that lacy detail. Now I've added my piece of batting, I'm adding my hanger. I'm just kind of checking it to make sure all the hangers are about the same height. And then I will hold this with my little clip so it doesn't move while I'm getting started. And for this one, I just kind of clipped it all the way around so it stayed in place. Now I decided to use this ecru thread. I use this for the outside edge of all of these. So they're all contrasting because my base egg is a color for each one. And then they're all consistent. Now you want to start between the layers. I'm starting at the top this time. I came through between the layers out the front, and then for this next stitch I'm going to go through my ribbon, which this is what I was talking about on the other one. If you pierce through the ribbon, it's not going to go anywhere. And this needle, I'm just struggling a little bit because this is an embroidery needle, so it's not very sharp and pointy, so trying to pierce that ribbon just takes a little bit more effort. So I've worked my way all the way around, making sure I pierce the other side of the ribbon. You want to make sure you get both sides of the hangers tacked in there, and then I will go back in the other direction. So I did keep that kind of every other ticking look on the tulip egg, but for this one, I'm going to go back the other direction. So I filled in that line on the outside on 2 eggs, but kept it every other one on one of them. Now I've gotten back to where I started. I have one more stitch. I want to come up between my layers, tie off my floss, and that knot's going to get hidden down in between those 2 layers. Then I can take the tail and I'm going to thread my needle back through between those 2 layers of the purple felt, and then I will poke it out the back and trim off the tail. And I'll do that with both tails. And here is that finished egg, and I think that it matches the other one so much better now. That bright teal was just overpowering when there was so much of it, so it looks so much better with just the little pops of teal. Now here's my third egg, and as I told you, I changed the colors on this too. I wanted it to match a little more, so I'm going to use that orangey color and then that sort of orangey yellow color. So the die cutting is exactly the same as it was at the beginning, just in different colors of felt. So I'll start with stitching my little S here. I did keep that in the purple color. I'm lining it up with the holes that I cut into the larger piece of felt. And then I'm using the teal floss to stitch it so I have some nice contrast. So I stitched in one direction and then back the other direction, and now I'm tying it off. This piece of floss was a little short. I was kind of playing chicken with it at the end, but luckily I made it work. Now I can layer this behind the opening that I cut in that orange egg, lining up those holes. And then I am going to stitch around this in the lighter color, that lighter orangey yellow color, so it matches the inside of the opening. And for this one, I did decide to leave it as just the running stitch and not go back in the other direction. I do think it is fun to kind of mix and match the running stitch one direction versus the running stitch in both directions whenever you get the opportunity. It just gives more interest to your designs. So now I'm tying that off and trimming off those ends. And now I'm ready to put my 2 pieces of my egg together. So just like the other ones, I have 1 piece of batting and I also have that white ribbon. I'm making sure it's the right length and making sure it's nice and centered. And I will hold that with my clips while I get everything lined up. And this will just hold it in place as I start my stitching. This one is just like the purple one because I'm not starting from something I already have going like I did on the first one. So I'm starting in the middle, starting between the layers, and then I'll start going from the front to the back and the back to the front. Again, I'm piercing through that ribbon as I go, so it's not going to move. And once I get back around to the top where I started, I'll remove that clip and make sure I poke right through that ribbon wherever it hits my holes. And for this one, I did go back in the other direction for the outside part of the egg. I liked the every other in the center and then a full stitch around the outside edge. The outside edges are also a great place to incorporate a blanket stitch if you want to. I think those are always really fun on the outside edge, and I think I need to make some more eggs and give that a try. So now I am back to the top here, and I just need to tie this off and hide my tails down in there. Now, once I got this tied off and those little tails hidden and started looking at this, I had a funny stitch at the top where the ribbon is on the front, unfortunately. And I also felt like it wasn't as full or detailed as the other 2 when I looked at them all together. So once I get these little tails put in here and out the back and trimmed off, you might be able to see my little mishap at the top. It just doesn't quite look right. It's like I missed a hole or something at the top where the ribbon is, and I also feel like this needs a little more going on. So I'm going to show you how I fix those problems. This is me looking at that weird stitch that I don't even know what happened. I think it's the knot pulled through maybe. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't want to re-stitch the whole thing. I think there's a good way to change this up. So I'm using the Gathered Garden die. There's a tiny little bee in here. I'm going to use that as an embellishment, and I'm also going to add a bow to this. So this is a perfect time to use some little scraps. This is why I don't throw all the scraps away. I kind of throw them in a little bin on my desk so I can grab them while I'm working on a project. So I'm cutting out all of the pieces of the bee. I have a dark gray, that cream color, and then a yellow. And then I will layer these together and stitch up this little bee. I did go look at the example on the Poshta website so I knew how to stitch him up. So I'm starting with those wings that just layer over the center. And for all the stitches on this one, I'm just using this ecru color of floss. I didn't feel like there was a need to change to a yellow floss just for the little stripe. That's a light enough yellow color that it's really not going to matter. I am going to tie this off, but I'm not going to cut it off. Just tying it so it doesn't come loose. And then I will layer the little yellow piece on. And it's just 2 tiny little stitches because it is the tiniest little stripe, but this is the cutest little bee I think I've ever seen. So I'll just tie this off as well and trim it off. Now, because I am adding this after the fact, I'm not going to stitch it on. I'm just going to glue it, which you'll see me do here in a minute. Now for the bow, I did pull out some pale pink gingham ribbon. I tied a bow. I am threading my floss through the top, through the back of the bow, and then I will thread it through again. and I'm actually going to thread it through the back of the bow, through the knot one more time, and then I'm going to tie this off too. And then what I did with these tails is exactly what I do with the other tails. I threaded them into my needle and then I just thread them out the back and trim them off. So my bow is definitely nice and stuck down because it is sewn there, and then I can trim off the tails to the length that I want them to be. And to add my little bee, I'm just using some tacky glue. Just one little dot, and then I will just add him there. Now, he did look a little funny to me, and I think that's because he didn't have any antenna. So I thought I would try something. I got some dark gray embroidery floss. I have 3 strands. I'm going to go in and out right above his head. And then I'm going to tie it in 2 knots. And it actually worked out the way I thought it would in my head, so I'm really glad about that. So I'm tying this in 2 little knots. And then I thought about stitching in a little antenna, but then I decided I'm just going to cut it off and kind of let them stick out. And I think it looks really cute. I think that really helped it look more like a bee to add those little antennae. And I'll just hold this up closer so you can see it. And look how cute that is. I just think that's adorable. So here are all the eggs I created today. I have the banded egg details egg with that cute tulip. I have the filigree details egg, and then I also have the window details egg that has that monogram, and then I added that cute little bee and the bow. So thank you so much for sticking around on this pretty long video. I hope you are inspired to create some felt Easter eggs for yourself. And if you have not already, hop on over to Nichol Spohr's YouTube channel and see what she has stitched up as well. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.